opportunity to chat with you. Maybe first about these poems that you've written with, the immediate audience of regional council as your kind of, intended audience. I love that it seems like all of Halifax's poet laureates have been advocates of, like, a fairer, more caring, socially just place to live in, and certainly you're not an exception to that pattern. And with one of these poems that you read for regional council, you're very clearly like yearning for that kind of society, one where there's like more support for people. And you do it by asking a very pointed question. You ask, where's the money coming from? When you first published the poem on your website, um, giving it to a larger audience, what were you kind of feeling in terms of like that flow of money and all of these big, complicated governmental processes through which we do sort of try to decide how we're going to use public money to turn our place on this land into something more livable, basically? And how did writing that poem help you kind of figure out some of the stuff that you were feeling as the new poet laureate?
Well, I'm not sure that it helped me figure out what I was feeling, but it was a way to pose some questions to to council, and to, I guess, make people think about that. When I published it on the website, it was more just so people could see what I'd read to council, what I'd said to council.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I wrote the poem, I was really thinking about the fact that I don't know who has the kind of money to pay $3,000 in rent every month, or to buy $1 million condo necessarily. There's so many of these luxury
Mm-hmm.
condos and apartments. Who has that kind of money? Do they exist in great numbers? And um, when developers are building these buildings, are they counting on these people to fill them? And where do they think they're coming from? Like, I just had all these kinds of questions. um and I don't you said we figure out these things, we collectively decide how we use public wealth. At least in your notes you said that. And I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking, do we do that? I mean,
Right.
counts. I mean, we as the people collectively don't have a lot of say in that. Sometimes we may be consulted, we may not. Think we may be consulted, and then things go ahead as they would have anyway. So yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
so um I guess about the what I was feeling when I was, about when I published this poem about the flow of money and that kind of thing. um I was, I guess, I feel so much is left to developers, and they don't have a mandate to care about much more than their bottom line. Whereas, but who does have a mandate and a responsibility are the city and the province and the federal government. And um, we need, I mean, the public needs to be consulted, but we also don't have all the answers. But I
Mm.
sort of see government, and maybe this is naive of me, but that they should have some vision as to how to create the society that they say they want and that most of us want. Um, and I, I just think they're supposed to lead us. They are
Mm.
supposed to consult us, yes, but they also have to have a big picture, which we don't all have, and we can't see all the corners and all the aspects of everything. But they're supposed to be in that position.
Mhm.
Um, and when I wrote this poem, I was asking questions that I hoped they would consider when they're making these decisions. Um, yeah, and writing the poem hasn't really clarified much for me. I did say that it's
Mm.
uh, I don't think the build and they will come model of development is necessarily going to make this a better world, because bus drivers and teachers and nurses can't afford $3,000 a month or $1 million condo, and we need those people.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I stop there.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like in the poem, you are kind of talking at one point about the magic arrival of this like hypothetical population of skilled people that will help
Mhm.
us run the city, which seems to be a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way of signaling to your original audience, like members of regional council, that they might be guilty of a certain like lack perhaps of vision or lack of leadership in terms of just
Right.
having this kind of wishful thinking about where this like professional class of people that are supposedly flocking to Halifax are going to like live, for example, how they're going to get
Mhm.
around. I thought that was a pretty powerful moment. You're also wondering in that same poem whether our local government is relying on a kind of magical thinking when it assumes that it knows where our quote water and power will come from as the city kind of spreads out and sprawls, demanding more and more resources from the natural world. So yeah, like there's all this magical thinking that seems to happen in governments. Um, but there's this other sort of magical thinking you're also talking about in the book, right? In terms of the way that like banks and big corporations, perhaps especially these huge supermarket chains, find ways to take away all of our money, right?
Mhm.
A process where you say we don't quite know how our quarters and loonies disappear into thin air. um, so I had some questions about the way that you're working with that concept of magic in the poem, but I wondered if you'd be open to, just since listeners might not have read it, reading a portion of the poem anyway.
Right. Okay. So, should I read maybe the first three stanzas, or
That
do you
would
have a
be,
particular? Yeah.
I think that'd be great.
So this poem is called simply "To a New Council." This city sometimes feels like it's falling apart under my feet, though it has cranes all over it, pulling luxury condos out of the ground like a rabbit's out of a magician's hat. Over and over I hear the refrain, "Where are the people coming from?" But I also wonder, where's the money coming from? It's not in the pockets of artists running for the bus with their paintings under their arms, or grocery store clerks, those pandemic heroes who can't afford the food they sell, or students carrying the heavy weight of books and debt on their backs. It's not in the pockets of folks living rough in tents or bedding down in doorways under bridges, going hungry and cold all over the spacious sprawl we call the municipality. It's not in the pockets of folks in public housing, disabled folks, families, and elders who at month's end are at their wits' end trying to make those ends meet.
Yeah. No, it's so powerful. Like just that simple question of like, where is the actual money?
Mhm.
Leads you down this sort of rabbit hole of thinking about the ways in which I think money itself almost is like this imagined and magical thing. Like the idea that
Mhm.
we bind so much power into these, like, representations of value. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, like, there are, as I say, like these different categories of magic. The one being like governmental tricks of the trade, perhaps. The other being these like financial methods of kind of extracting more wealth from us. It does seem like the poem has this other idea of magic in it, though. I love the
Mhm.
kind of playful way in which you use like abracadabra, alakazam in the poem. Like there's something also about like just a kind of declarative mode of doing magic that I think you might feel is more of the people and more collective.
Mhm.
Is there a kind of third form of magic in that poem that you're kind of trying to offer up a little bit?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the creativity is needed for sure to make this world that we hope for, and it's not all going to come from taxation, and it's not going to come from the market. So I think, you know, I my hope is that I mean, I think there's a lot of well-meaning people in government and council, and much as I like to criticize and be cynical about them, I think
Mm,
they want to do things right. They want to do right by the city, and so I think they have, just as we all do, have the power to imagine a better
mm,
world and to imagine solutions that will get us there. Um, and so I do. I guess I oppose the kind of business of government and business
mm,
with the imaginative, the power of imagination and community and connection to make this a better city. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, that's what that was sort of my reading. So I think just staying for one more minute on the poetry you've written with regional council in mind. There's a few lines where you describe Barrington Street, and I really love the kind of imagery there. You say you describe the valley of shadow Barrington's bricks and glass and crumbling turrets create. I think that's just a beautiful way of describing that stretch of road in Halifax. But you say that Barrington exists between the mountains of prosperity and insecurity, with its bricks and glass and crumbling turrets, right? So there's beauty there, but there's like something, if not hidden, something a little bit obscured that I think you're trying to help people see. And it seems to come from like a real connection to the place itself, right? A deep connection to it. I guess I wanted to ask about that line that Barrington exists between the mountains of prosperity and insecurity. Because yeah, like I went to see Astra Taylor speak here when she spoke for her book Age of Insecurity, and she talked about like what that concept represents. And apparently, in terms of communications research, talking about insecurity can be very moving for people, to hear that word. It resonates. And I think, from Taylor's perspective, it really resonates because it kind of keys you into the experience of time, right? Like that experience of, being food insecure and being hungry, being job insecure and being poor. Like it's all about your kind of fear of what's coming, right?
Mhm.
And so, I think that insecurity became a lot more clear to folks in Halifax when, that central area right out in front of City Hall, known as Parade Square,
Right.
became a designated encampment for unhoused people. And so, all of a sudden, insecurity is just like there, it's just visible. You don't always see it when you're walking down Barrington, but it seems like the poem is in part about trying to help people understand it, right? Um, can you speak more to that idea of like why the street stood out to you as a line between
Yeah.
different classes and different types of people in Halifax?
Yeah. I didn't see it as a dividing line, but I saw it as so this poem was written as though someone is on the bus going from where I live, which is in a fairly central part of Halifax, it's um, near Summer and Spring Garden, and that trip down Spring Garden and then down Barrington to City Hall, which is the exact route that I took the day I was reading to council.
Hmm.
Um, so Barrington Street it's an interesting street for me because I guess, I mean, it's not a huge city, but that's where the financial district kind of is seated around that area.
Hmm.
But there's also um, I mean, you see some panhandlers, you see some people who are really on the margins, but not many. Um,
Hmm.
but you see it in the buildings. You see the like the Khyber building kind of crumbling, and the some of these older buildings just lying, kind of waiting for something
Hmm.
and for nothing. And
Hmm.
so and there's a lot of shadow because of the buildings are tall, and there's not much sun on that sheet. Um, as compared to Spring Garden Road, where you see a lot
Mm,
more panhandlers and people who are looking for services, maybe, or going toward services,
mhm,
um, and the the sidewalks are broader. There's more small business on that street. It's more
mhm,
lively. But Barrington, even though like the wealth is concentrated there, the banks and government is concentrated there on City Hall and Province House, I guess. Um, the uh, so it's kind of a strange dead zone where it doesn't feel really like it's part of human life sometimes.
I know what you
For
mean.
me
Yeah,
anyway. Yeah,
yeah.
so that's the Barrington sheet that I'm talking about. And there is, I mean, it's kind of not exactly a line, but a um that sheet, there's a kind of a mix of a lot of uh, um not poverty so much as um, the buildings themselves are showing their age,
Yeah.
and the organizations that are housed in them may be struggling. Like
Hmm.
the Khyber has struggled. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, um, yeah. Anyway, I wasn't sure if that sort of answers your question about how what I'm thinking and feeling about Barrington Street, but
Yeah, well, I mean, it absolutely does, and I
mm,
would say, anything more is really helpful because, the poem kind of teases this poetic appraisal of infrastructure in a way,
mm,
right?
mhm,
And hearing you speak more to like the contrast between Spring Garden and Barrington, which could not be
mhm,
starker. I think you're right.
mm, mhm,
Kind of fleshes it out for me a little bit. And it's interesting, like your poetry in general, it maps so well onto the municipality, right? Like there was a short poem that I was hoping I could bring up,
mhm,
warships, that
mhm.
made me immediately think of this moment where Halifax Harbor was visited by this like US aircraft carrier or something, like this big nuclear powered warship,
Yeah.
and all the news was kind of universally euphoric. Like there was all this fanfare about this warship coming into the harbor. I'm like, where are my people that are anti-imperialist right now? Like, and I thought like this very short 8-line piece, which talks about how warships are not made for people, was like a kind of useful tactile way to convey this idea that like we shouldn't just uncritically praise these machines as though they're like symbolic of national pride. I don't know what. Um, I just, yeah, I wanted to hear you speak about like the way that that poem works, I guess, the way that it expresses a certain disgust almost about the actual like tactility of a warship.
Mm,
Where did that poem
mm.
kind of come from, I guess?
Yeah, I was definitely I wrote it a long time ago, so like maybe in the early 2000s, and I can't remember. I was trying to
Mm,
think, was it an American or a Canadian warship? But
mm,
frankly, they all warships all give me that same vibe. Doesn't matter where they're from. Um,
mm,
and I um I don't know, how this poem's been received by other people. I
mm,
feel I sent it to Voice of Women when they were going to Ottawa recently. I think it was in the past year or two for a rally, and for a peace rally, and they read it there, and I know it moved some people.
mm.
Um, but I haven't had anyone saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," or "You're
Oh, good.
anti-military," or anything like that. I haven't had that, but I I feel like warships are. a little bit like Barrington Street. There's a bit of a dead zone feel to them,
Mm,
and their, I mean, their purpose is, when you put it sort of bluntly, is to kill and destroy. Right? It doesn't have. I mean, it may be used in other kind of missions, but that's what it's made for.
right.
So I am generally opposed to that, I can say.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely, and I mean, like top to bottom, I think the military industrial complex needs to be assessed for it's like whatever. I mean, post-war viability, even right, like the
Yeah.
number of warnings that even major military figures like Eisenhower gave us about that accumulation ought to have been enough. I mean, for us to be embarrassed almost as a species by how massive this accumulation of war
Mhm.
machines has become.
Mm.
But maybe let's talk about some of the more uplifting aspects of your wonderful book of poetry from Gaspro Press, Body Parts.
Oh,
Gaspro's great. My friend Corey Lavender put out his first book with
yeah,
them recently,
Corey's great.
and yeah, and I mean, I guess I wanted to maybe start with the title poem, "Body Parts." It talks in this really musing and amusing way about your grandma's nose, its growths, these tentacles that you say horrified you as a kid. I wanted to mention that, like, when I was little, my grandma would like do things like remove her dentures, uh, just to kind of like gross us out or startle us. She'd do this thing where she'd like hold her arm up and ask us to like swat the like loose skin on her arm, like all these things that like just total shamelessness about the body, right?
Yeah.
And I really love that about her, like that shamelessness about her body parts. Your poem, though, ends so beautifully with these lines that are really meant to um, kind of evoke the destruction that our minds sometimes seem to desire. The like you say, the glorification and illumination they tend to search for,
Mhm.
and the different sort of self acceptance and self maybe love that the body looks for, which you capture with this story about a nurse that was trying to help you remove scars. Anyway, it's all very just like luscious and lush, this poem, but it's also like incredibly it's full of grief as well, right, and pain.
Mhm.
um what I guess I wanted to ask is, like, it's the title poem of the book. In some ways, I think that itself is meant to kind of direct the reader to use that as a sort of cipher for understanding the rest of the book. Was that intentional to a certain extent, and if so, um, what are you looking for in terms of that contrast between the destruction our mind wants and like the simple yearnings of our body?
Mhm.
And did you find any sort of like reconciliation of those two things in the process of writing Body Parts?
Well, so there's Body Parts, the collection of poems. It was really meant to be a standalone chapbook.
Hmm.
And I was going to write a whole bunch of poems about different body parts. Oops, sorry about that.
No problem.
I'll say that again. So Body Parts was um, originally supposed to be its own little chapbook of a bunch of different poems about different body parts, but I wrote four poems about different body parts, and then I got a little stuck,
Mm,
um, and included them in this chapbook, but gave the chapbook its name. Um,
mm,
and the so the ones I wrote uh, were my first four, and it ended there. And I'm kind of fascinated with this idea of, like, the body is just fascinating in itself, but that all these parts, which
mm,
have their own sort of meaning to us and significance to us and function, like actual physical function,
Mm,
um, to take them separately and sort of um, say, okay, well, the nose, what does that signify for me?
mhm,
Beyond that, I use it to smell things. um,
mhm, mhm,
like I think so. I guess the rest of the book was written at all different times. Body part poems are fairly new. Other poems like Polar Bear uh, and The Brain Swept Clean of Hope were older poems.
mhm,
Um, and but they're all sort of pieces of this map of my, like a psychic map, I guess, of my
mhm,
own mind. Um, and grief and loss do play a big role, but so does hope. I think in um, this collection, like there's
mhm,
little glimpses of it here and there, which I
mhm.
couldn't live without. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the reason why I titled it Body Parts is because these poems are so, like, they're disjointed, they're all over the place. Um, their subject matter is quite different. Sometimes style is quite different, but they all are part of my psychic map, I guess.
Mhm,
Which so the body can be kind of a stand-in for the psyche, I guess, a lot of the time.
mhm,
So
mhm.
yeah, I
I like
guess
that a lot.
yeah.
You know, I think that disjointedness is, a commonplace part of the human experience, right? Especially perhaps in 2025, that feeling of being
Yeah.
out of joint. We're constantly doing mental gymnastics, I think, to try and just like overcome a lot of the cognitive dissonance that we feel.
Mm,
Um, and in Polar Bear, which you mentioned, there is a degree of that kind of, if not cognitive dissonance, definitely conflict. Like there's a moment in that poem where the speaker, I I'm going to say you, put your head in the polar bear's mouth, which is this like really remarkable act. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about like that poem, which comes, yeah, I mean, comes very close, if not right at the end of the book.
yeah. It,
Yeah, it's the very last poem in the book, and it is prefaced by a poem called "In the Brain Swept Clean of Hope."
hmm,
So like in that poem, you are absolutely wrestling with hope, but you're trying to articulate exactly what it means to feel totally like devoid of hope,
yeah.
and lacking any of that like vitality. And yeah, I was just like really interested to hear you speak about the kind of order of those last two poems, because while the book is in some ways disjointed, it doesn't feel accidental that
Mm,
you preface a poem effectively on mass extinction and climate change with a poem titled "In the Brain Swept Clean of Hope."
yeah.
So I'm curious to hear you kind of reflect on the order, and I'm also hoping that you might be open to reading Polar Bear.
Sure, I can do both. Um, so the order, the ordering of this book, um, was somewhat left to my editor,
Right.
um, uh, my original editors, and then my second editor, Gasparo. Um, but that poem is a lot about my own personal experience of depression,
Right.
um, which I've written quite a lot about my mental health in various poems. This was one of them.
Hmm.
And the polar bear poem is about climate grief, basically, and which is another form of mental distress. Um, so I I feel like a lot of the poems in here are about my personal experience of my mental health. whereas the polar bear is kind of opening it up to the wider world and saying, this is, this is something we should all be a little depressed about, and feeling a little hopelessness about, but hopefully not an overpowering amount. But so I guess this poem just is meant to sort of speak to the world at large rather than
Right.
just to my own experience. Um, so sure, I can read it if you
Thanks so
like.
much.
It's
That'd
a,
be amazing.
it's a
Yeah.
few pages. Okay. Polar bear. The water is cold as a hammerhead. It's liquid nitrogen and a needle at the dentist. Cold as bells that ring every Sunday in the iron air. It squeezes the breath from me like an accordion. The dark is beautiful, milky, metallic, heavy and soft as snow that lulls lost travelers to sleep. I follow the polar bear to where the ice ends. He's ahead by a body's length, his small head just above water, bony beneath the sleek fur. He looks like a dog I knew who almost died eating rat poison in Chubby Park. The muscles in her head dwindled to nothing. You could see her skull shining through. This polar bear is a bone wrapped in fur. His body has eaten itself like a seal because the seals have disappeared. It's foolish, but devoured by guilt, I want to put my arms around him and carry him. His blood speaks to mine. Why are you here? Great paws churn the water. My blood circles my organs to keep them from freezing. It has no voice. The bear's head turns to look at me, black rimmed mouth, a mile of fangs. His bloodshot eyes see a seal. He smiles, a doggy smile. My heart aches, aggrieved. I put my head in his mouth. I'm sorry, my blood chatters. Bear melts like an iceberg. It's the small head above water, the great body below. The sun's octopus creeps toward us. Its warm arms caress my back. My skin turns rosy, and the water is on fire, dwindling to nothing but a desert littered with the bones of walrus and seal, whales and polar bears. A white harvest. I build an igloo of skulls. The sun peers through their eye holes. I sit in their shadow. Heat wraps around me and squeezes the breath from me. Why are you here? My blood asks. I'm sorry, whispers the sun.
Wow. Wow. I think, for a person like me who's like involved in climate communication, I'm always really interested in these sort of more artful experiments basically with trying to like reconcile ourselves with this moment that we're in, right? And yeah, I just find so many of these images really indelible. The image of blood speaking, uh or of it not speaking, of it going silent then speaking again. I think like that's really powerful. This image of an igloo of skulls to block like the intense heat of the sun is just so brilliantly kind of macabre, I guess. But like all of those are satellites of this central image, the polar bear starving at the place where the ice ends. And I guess I wanted to hear, even though the poem is you say fairly old at this point, you wrote it quite a while ago. I was hoping you could just maybe speak to some of the choices there around like these pretty lurid images in the text, right? Like
Mhm.
especially the dog in Shuby Park, which brings that death home for residents of Nova Scotia, I would say.
Mhm. That was a real dog, my friend's mother's Dalmatian. Um, Someone left some poisoned hot dog or something in the park, or I don't know. It
Wow.
seemed that it was a deliberate act to
Oh,
poison dogs. Um, so that image of this, the muscles wasting away on her skull and um, the skull shining through the skin, that's just a real, that was a real thing that happened
mm,
to this dog. And when I was thinking about the polar bears starving, and I think I'd seen pictures of the polar bears that were starving, it just brought to mind that dog, and I thought, well, I mean, polar bears definitely, they're part of our imagination. I think for people all over the world, not just Canadians, but we have images of polar bears and we know what they are, but we don't think of what we're doing with climate change as being a poisoning of a
Right.
beloved animal. So I guess that's why I drew that comparison to make that clear to
Mm.
people that these are similar things. Um,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
it's I think it really, is extremely effective and affecting,
Mm,
and just a testament to the ways that imagination can like open up, people's ability to feel these things that eventually you become kind of numb to, I think, you know.
right.
Um, and on that point, like I was hoping we could talk about your, wonderful short documentary, Me and My Teeth, which is available on CBC Gem, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. Um,
which is very
actually,
exciting.
you have to find it under by searching for Real East Coast, and it's
Right.
season 10, episode 2.
Gotcha.
One of several shorts.
It's worth searching for. First of all, it's very entertaining. Like it's very fun to watch. It reminded me a bit of Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, which is a graphic memoir and film that is coming up a little bit again now,
Mm,
with Iran being in the news, because really it's her narrative of growing up Iranian during the Iranian Revolution, um, but also like her narrative of dealing with puberty and dealing with like love and all of these things.
mm,
Me and My Teeth has that same kind of like interest in using art for the purpose of kind of being a little bit subversive, a little bit irreverent, and thinking through, I think, how we grow into our bodies, I guess. And you mentioned at the screening of the film I attended a little while ago that creating the film was a challenge in some ways,
mm,
like especially the collaborative process could be a challenge at times. And I'm really interested in that aspect of filmmaking because it's not part of
sure.
my experience. And I wonder if you could talk about like how certain artistic choices were made, the music, the way to include poetry, all of those things, and how they
Mm,
came together in the end through that kind of
right.
collaboration.
Sure. So yeah, collaboration I find hard. I'm used to writing by myself, writing poetries and novels, and then working on them with an editor. So very few people involved in that process. But in filmmaking, it's a different story. Like there's all kinds of people with all different kinds of skills that you need to make it happen. Even for a short film like I made. And So I really, I started with a script that I wrote and revised a number of times, and revised even through the process of editing the film as well,
Hmm.
which is interesting for me. Like I thought, oh, I'm going to write the script and then I'm going to shoot the film, and it's going to be all sort of bang, bang, bang. But in fact, I wrote the script, and this film is very sort of centered on that script. It's being a writer first. I don't think so much in terms of what the film's going to look like and sound like. I
Hmm.
was just concerned about the words at first. um though I did the image of sidewalk guy, I created that early on um in the process. It's sort of a digital animation, and so it was basically a monologue interspersed with poetry, and then I created some of the images and we shot the live action. It was Anne Verrill, who was my camera person. She's a local filmmaker of, you know quite a respected filmmaker, and she shot the live action, and she I feel like she did a lot of directing of me in order to get the right shots, and she
Mm,
knew to shoot more than I asked her for sometimes. So that I found that part interesting and hard, like to be the
mm,
subject of my own film and to um, be both director and being directed
right.
was not hard but interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and the a lot of the other stuff I did do myself, but the music I found on a website called freesound.org, and it's a wonderful website where you can get a lot of public domain sound effects and music. And I just took two scraps of improvised music that I liked and worked that in over the course of the film several times. So as far as collaborating goes, they were kind of silent partners in a way.
Mm,
Um, I just got their music off this website
sure.
and did credit them in the film as was appropriate. But um, yeah, I guess I'm not sure. Like the collaborative aspect too was um, in the fact that I had consultants, I had a mentor,
Hmm.
and they would advise me on things that worked and didn't work. And sometimes I would balk, and sometimes I would need more help. And but it was a huge learning experience for me, which I may never repeat. I'm not sure.
Well,
It
it
was
sounds,
hard.
yeah, it sounds like it was pretty demanding,
Yeah,
even just sort of like emotionally, intellectually, kind
yeah,
of taxing to sit in this place of trying to be your authentic self, but you know you're on camera. Like that, that to me, that would make me do flips,
yeah.
if only in my stomach. Um, it'd be tricky, and yet the film, you make the film, it focuses on your experiences with sort of dental health and mental health, but it is also, as you say, about this figure of sidewalk guy, this anonymous person, an unhoused person, whose misfortune, or really we should say like neglect by the system, causes you to feel a lot of different emotions throughout the course of the film. And in the end, sidewalk guy's missing teeth, his poor dental health, kind of communicates to you in a way, and leads you down this path of thinking about why teeth are so much more apparent in their absence, or if they're imperfect, and like thinking about normativity and stigmatization of people on the basis of health. um and like, I guess I keep asking you the same question about like what you learned or what you figured out about yourself in the process of creating, but
Mm.
that here is again what I'm kind of curious about, is like, what did you learn about the histories of seeing decaying teeth as evidence of like moral decay, or spiritual decay, or these kinds of things, in the course of making Me and My Teeth?
Well, I mean, I've read a bit about the history of mental health care and in particular mental health care, not dental health care so much.
Hmm.
And in that um, in my readings, it sounded like um, you know mental health problems, issues, concerns were thought to be related to one's spiritual and moral health.
Hmm.
That you were weak spiritually um, or compromised somehow morally if you had certain kinds of problems.
Hmm.
And I think dental, I mean, people's dental health in this century, last century, and this century, probably more so, has been seen as an indicator of how much you care about yourself, your income level, your like your professionalism.
Yeah.
Um, things like that. So straight white teeth are associated with good things, whereas
Discipline, who knows? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and um, and an income is certainly an indicator of how well you can has been an indicator of how well you can get care, how much access you have to care for your teeth.
Hmm.
um, and I think no matter what people say, I think poverty is stigmatized in this society. Like it's people
Absolutely.
are not um, if they look at you and they think you're poor, they make all kinds of judgments about how come why you're poor.
Hmm.
And the same for dental health, and the same for mental health.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think. Uh, sorry, I lost my place in my notes, but um, when I was a kid, I kind of bought into the idea that my teeth meant something more than just, teeth. I
Hmm. Hmm.
somehow got this idea that because I had less problematic teeth than other people, that I was somehow superior, or I don't know, I wouldn't have used that word as a kid. I would have used more like I'm somehow elevated above these other people, right? Like
Hmm. Hmm.
um and I wanted to be special. I wanted to feel like I was morally and spiritually good, and
Hmm.
that I was special. And my teeth helped me, because my teeth were good at that time, helped me
Hmm.
believe that. So
Hmm.
and the things we think about ourselves definitely translate to how we think about other people. Like I I don't buy the fact that people will treat other people better than they'll treat themselves sometimes. I think that we that translate how we see ourselves. Our harshness toward ourselves does translate to harshness towards other people.
I think that makes some
It
sense
does.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I just pulled up a book that I've been reading called Don't Talk About Politics, which kind of argues along the lines of what you're just describing, that people have a profound desire to see themselves as good. The politics is not so much about knowledge and truth as it is about like our values and the things that we consider to be good, right? Part of the good life.
Right.
Um, and I think like the there's a way in which this documentary does actually tease that out a little bit, in obviously kind of indirect and artistic ways. There's this way in which like what you're trying to do is show us, I think, the problematic lenses that we have for that we use often, like every single day, basically, to evaluate other people's
Mhm.
moral fiber on the basis of
Right.
like how they're dressed, how they're put together, how disheveled or kempt they are, all of these
Right.
things. Um, and I guess like thinking now about the film being out in the world, like can you imagine? I certainly can imagine it being used in like a health communication class to try and get people to think more deeply about what, health as a discipline should do, right? Advocating perhaps for a better, fairer society and so on. Like, can you imagine it having those kinds of educational applications, or did you primarily think of it just as, a work of art?
Yeah, no, it definitely has those applications, and Dalhousie Dentistry has shown it a couple times, maybe even a few times by now, um, to their students. And I'm happy for it to be used that way, and I it's not just a piece of art to me, if you can say that, but it is meant to make people think about broader issues of how we treat people, and how our society is ordered to, you know, that disadvantages some people over others.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I think the fact that, like, I was hard on myself when I had a problem teeth. I think that we all think we judge ourselves. I mean, we talk about judging ourselves harder than we do other people, but I do believe those judgments we have of ourselves, we have of other people.
Mm,
They can't help but it's an
hmm
equal opportunity thing. So I think um, when I think when someone has, we shouldn't. Well, we shouldn't judge what someone else is. We shouldn't judge people mostly because we can't judge other people with we don't have enough information,
mm,
um, and we can't say what someone's been through. Why when someone has less access and opportunity to things that make us healthier, including healthcare and income. Um,
hmm
so okay, I'm getting a little bit off track, but I guess what I'm trying to say is two things: that we should be kinder to ourselves, and that will make us less judgmental of other people and improve our mental health.
hmm
And
hmm
we should be aware that our judgments are um, usually based on nothing more than like a fear or a desire to be good, as you said, to feel we're good or we're special in some way more than other people. So yeah. Anyway, totally
No,
off
that's
track.
no. I think it's exactly on. Personally, I think it's totally on track. Like the people that I've been reading, like Ingrid. I interviewed Ingrid Waldron recently about her newest book, from the Enlightenment to Black Lives Matter, which is actually like fundamentally about the fear within the medical establishment generally of doing anything like advocacy. And it's becoming more and more apparent that there doesn't really seem to be a lot of space in that professional discipline of trying to care for people, a lot of space for kind of radicalizing what care means and trying to broaden what care means, and I think the work that the thinking and the writing that you're trying to do around the power of judgment and the kind of weakening of social trust because of that problem of judgment. The last question I wanted to ask, Anna, is about perhaps this idea of magic as work, but also as wonder. You've got this poem that people can read on your website called Falling Behind, which I
Yes.
really resonated with, where you talk about how the world is all business, so fast paced and changing that it feels like we might be stuck in place relative to all of this activity swirling all around us. And what I really liked rereading that poem again today is that you have a kind of, resolve in staying slow, in asserting this like way of arranging your days that is focused on things like prayer and sleep, things that are not fast paced, in other words.
Yeah.
um, so like you're kind of you're saying to the world, I can stay here and you can, as you put it, leave me in your rear view mirror. There's just this like kind of declarative quality to that poem that I think is, I don't know, it's cathartic almost to read somebody praise slowness in this way. And yet there is a certain magic almost in that like statement of defiance that you make, where you're changing so slowly that you can barely see me change position, and yet you say I must have. Um, and like my immediate impulse when I read the poem the first time was to really read it pretty academically. Like you're attacking just the way that fossil fuels and Western culture has led to this great acceleration and the destruction of everything. But another reading would be that you're kind of admitting that you're falling behind. It's like you're just accepting that you've kind of lost your edge to some extent.
Yeah.
Um, and so, when you signal to your reader, for example, in that poem, Falling Behind, that if they look back at you, they'll see you, quote, waving and disappearing. Are you doing that with a level of like resignation? Is it a giving up, or is it actually more like that joyful thing of just defiantly saying, "Yeah, I'm falling behind, so what?"
It's funny. When um, when you talked about that, I was thinking, well, really, I wrote this poem because I feel like I'm getting old, losing my edge, as you say, and I'm slowing down physically and mentally, um, and I was just thinking about all the ways I'm slowing down in this life. Um, but it is a critique, really, I think, of capitalism and that we, um, and that it leaves so many of us behind. People with disabilities and people who are aging, seniors, and I'm. Although I wouldn't say I'm being left behind with joy or with dread, it's a resignation, yes, but that I guess the waving part is, waving goodbye as though nothing in particular is that wrong, is more to say I still have agency, I still have dignity, I can wave at least and say goodbye to you as you leave me in the dust, kind of thing. Um, so it's neither joy nor dread, but a kind of maybe cheeky acceptance. I don't know.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing as aggressive as what I'm kind of projecting onto it, perhaps. But it is this like act of defiance. You're like sticking it to everybody. Yeah, you go ahead and join the rat race. I'll be here enjoying myself. But we put ourselves into the poems that we read, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm
And,
glad of that, Scott,
right?
that you read it differently than I
Yeah.
had sort of written it, but yeah.
No, really a huge fan, and recommend everybody check out Me and My Teeth. Recommend folks pick up a copy of Body Parts, which you can get at Bookmark and elsewhere. But also just keep track of what Anna is doing, and just really grateful that you were able to be on the pod today.
Thank you so much, Scott.